I had been forgotten for as long as I could remember. My name is Anna, and I am 28 years old. I have spent my entire life living under the shadow of my older sister, Sophia. Sophia was 4 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, she was perfect. She was beautiful, intelligent, talented, and, most importantly, she knew how to win our parents' admiration. I, on the other hand, was always the overlooked child. When Sophia won the Best Student Award, I was just the other daughter. When Sophia won a music competition, my parents told me I should find a hobby that was worth something. When Sophia graduated from an Ivy League university, my parents threw a grand party while they forgot the date of my graduation. But the moment that truly made me realize that I would never be good enough for my parents happened on my 16th birthday. I had hoped for a small celebration, just a cake, some candles, and maybe a little attention. But instead, my parents were too busy celebrating Sophia's college acceptance letter. While Sophia was showered with champagne and congratulatory hugs, I was left with a half-melted birthday cake on the dining table. "This isn't about you, Anna," my mother had said dismissively. "Sophia just got accepted into her dream school. You should be happy for her." And so, just like that, my birthday was forgotten. I had always been second place, always the afterthought. At 18, I made the decision to leave home and chase my passion: interior design. I knew my parents would never support me. "Interior design is not a real job, Anna. Why can't you study finance like Sophia? You need something stable," my mother scolded when I told her about my dream. I ignored them. I worked hard, studied hard, and for once in my life, I was doing something for myself. And then, I met Ethan. Ethan was different from anyone I had ever met. He was kind, supportive, and genuinely cared about me, something I had never experienced in my own family. We met at a cozy cafe where I usually worked on my designs. Ethan was a doctor, charming, intelligent, and full of warmth. With him, I felt like I was finally seen, not as Sophia's sister, but as Anna. We fell in love, and for the first time, I believed that I had found something that truly belonged to me. After 3 years of dating, Ethan and I started talking about marriage and building a future together. I thought I had finally escaped my sister's shadow. But then, Sophia came back home. I didn't know it yet, but Sophia was about to steal everything from me once again. She had been living abroad for years, working in finance, but after a recent breakup, she decided to move back home. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then, Sophia started getting too close to Ethan. She invited him for coffee. She constantly texted him, asking for medical advice. She always found a way to insert herself into our plans, as if it were completely normal. At first, I ignored it. But soon, Ethan started acting differently. He became distant, started hiding his phone, and when I asked him about it, he simply laughed and called me paranoid. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe that Sophia would never do that to me. But one night, I accidentally saw a text message from Sophia to Ethan. "Are you sure about this? I don't want to hurt Anna." My entire world shattered. I confronted Ethan immediately. My heart was racing, my hands shaking as I held up his phone. "Explain this to me, Ethan," I demanded, my voice breaking. Ethan sighed heavily, avoiding my gaze. And then, without any guilt or hesitation, he spoke the words that would haunt me forever. "I'm sorry, Anna, but Sophia and I are in love." I felt like the ground beneath me had collapsed. I turned to Sophia, hoping she would deny it, hoping she would say this was all a misunderstanding. But instead, she simply shrugged and smirked. "I didn't want to hurt you, Anna," she said in an eerily calm voice. "But you know, Ethan deserves someone like me." At that moment, I made a vow. I would never forgive her. I would never forget this. I don't remember much about the hours after Ethan's confession. I must have left the cafe where we had met for what was supposed to be a casual dinner. I must have walked home in a daze, my heart pounding so loudly that I could hear nothing else. I must have cried, screamed, and felt my entire body collapse under the weight of betrayal. But what I do remember, what I will never forget, was the way my parents reacted when I told them. I hadn't planned on telling them, but when I arrived home that night, my mother was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared tea. She looked up at me, her smile fading as soon as she saw my face. "Anna, what happened?" she asked. My voice was hoarse, my hands shaking. "Ethan! Ethan and Sophia!" I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt too heavy, too painful to say out loud. But my mother understood immediately. Her response? Not shock, not anger, not sympathy. She simply sighed and shook her head, as if I had told her something as mundane as a broken coffee mug. "Oh, Anna," she murmured, "these things happen." I froze. These things happen? I stared at her, waiting, hoping for her to say more. Hoping she would tell me she was on my side, that she would confront Sophia for what she had done, that she would call Ethan and tell him he was an absolute disgrace. But instead, she took a sip of her tea and said, "Well, Ethan is a great catch, honey. You can't blame Sophia for falling for him." It was as if she had slapped me across the face. "You're defending her?" My voice cracked. "She stole my fiancé." My mother frowned, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Now, let's not be dramatic, Anna. Ethan made his choice. Maybe you should be asking yourself why he picked Sophia instead of you." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She genuinely believed I wasn't good enough. I stumbled back, gripping the counter for support. "You're really saying this to me?" I whispered. "Oh, honey," she said with a sigh, placing a hand on my shoulder like she was comforting a child who had lost a toy. "Sophia has always been a little magnetic. You know that. She can't help it if men fall for her. Maybe it's time you move on." I pulled away from her touch, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. She didn't care. She never cared. I turned and stormed out of the house, my legs moving before my mind could catch up. I don't know how long I walked, but when I finally stopped, I realized I was standing in front of my father's office. I hesitated before entering. Unlike my mother, my father was quieter, more reserved. He wasn't the type to get involved in drama. But maybe, just maybe, he would see things differently. I took a deep breath and knocked. When he saw me, his brows furrowed. "Anna, what's wrong?" I sat down across from him, pouring my heart out. I told him everything, how Ethan and Sophia had betrayed me, how I had gone to Mom for comfort and been dismissed like my pain didn't matter. When I was finished, I waited, my hands clenched together. My father leaned back in his chair and sighed. "We don't love Sophia more than you, Anna," he said. "She just needs us more." I felt like I had been dunked in ice water. "What?" I croaked. "She's always been special. She's always been the one people gravitate toward," he continued, as if that somehow justified everything. "And sometimes we have to support her a little more because of that." I could barely breathe. "Supporting her?" I said, my voice trembling. "By letting her take whatever she wants? By excusing everything she does?" My father sighed again, as if he were exhausted by this conversation. "I know you're upset," he said, "but life isn't always fair, Anna." Maybe this was just meant to be. Meant to be. Like I was just supposed to accept that Sophia had stolen the man I loved. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "I see," I whispered. "So no matter what she does, you'll always take her side." My father didn't respond, because he knew it was true. I walked out of his office and out of their lives. I didn't just lose Ethan that day. I lost my family too. In the days that followed, I ignored every call from my parents. At first, they left voicemails. My mother's voice was light and dismissive. "Anna, darling, don't be so dramatic. Call me back." Then the messages became frustrated. "Anna, stop this nonsense. You're blowing things out of proportion." And finally, they turned into guilt trips. "Anna, you're breaking this family apart. Do you really want to do that over a man?" I blocked their numbers. I refused to let them manipulate me anymore. And for the first time in my life, I was alone, but I was free. I tried to move on. I buried myself in my work, surrounded myself with friends who actually cared about me. But every now and then, I would hear updates about Sophia and Ethan. I learned from mutual friends that they were engaged, that my mother and father threw them a massive engagement party, one bigger than any celebration they had ever given me. I should have been devastated, but instead, I felt nothing, because I had already lost everything. What more could they take from me? But life has a funny way of balancing the scales. Because Sophia's perfect fairy tale? It didn't last. About a year after they got married, I started hearing whispers. Sophia had stopped working. She said she didn't need to since Ethan was successful, but something about their marriage wasn't right. One day, I got a text from an old mutual friend. "You're not going to believe this," she wrote, "but Ethan is cheating on Sophia." I stared at my phone, rereading the message over and over again. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I simply smirked. It was almost poetic. Sophia had stolen Ethan from me, thinking she had won. But in the end, she ended up exactly where I had been. And for the first time in my life, I felt peace. It started as whispers. Small, insignificant at first. I had spent over a year avoiding any news about Sophia and Ethan, pretending their existence didn't matter to me. But the universe had a funny way of making sure I still heard things. One day, I was out having lunch with my friend Emily when she casually said, "So, have you heard about your sister?" I froze, my fork hovering above my plate. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know. But the way Emily said it, the way she lowered her voice, like she was about to drop some devastating gossip, I knew I couldn't ignore it. So I took a deep breath and asked, "What about her?" Emily smirked. "Ethan is cheating on her." My grip on my fork tightened. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Anger, pain, satisfaction. But what I felt was nothing at all. I placed my fork down and leaned back in my chair. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded. "One of my coworkers saw him at a restaurant last week. Not with Sophia, with another woman. And they weren't just talking." I exhaled slowly. So it was true. And suddenly, the past didn't seem so far away. It wasn't long ago that I had sat in front of Ethan, demanding answers. It wasn't long ago that Sophia had smirked at me and told me Ethan belonged with someone like her. And now? Now Sophia was the one sitting at home, wondering why her husband was acting distant. She was the one questioning whether she was paranoid. She was the one being lied to. And the best part? I didn't have to do a single thing to make it happen. Over the next few weeks, the rumors exploded. Ethan's affair wasn't a secret anymore. It was an open scandal. He had been caught not just once, but multiple times, each time with a different woman. It was almost laughable how predictable it was. Sophia had taken him from me, thinking she had won. But in reality, she had taken a cheater and expected him to be faithful. What had she expected? Did she really believe she was special? That Ethan would suddenly change just because he was with her? I hadn't spoken to my parents in over a year, but one day I saw my mother's name flash across my phone screen. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe amusement, made me pick up. The first thing I heard was my mother's voice, strained and anxious. "Anna, it's about Sophia." Of course it was. I sighed. "What about her?" There was a pause. And then, in a tone I had never heard before, something close to desperation, she said, "Ethan is leaving her." I blinked. "I know." She sounded startled. You do?" I smiled to myself. "Mom, everyone knows. It's not exactly a secret." Silence. Then a deep sigh. "She's devastated, Anna. She's falling apart." I remained quiet. Because what was I supposed to say? I was supposed to feel bad for Sophia? The same Sophia who had looked me in the eye and taken everything from me? My mother hesitated before saying, "She needs support. She needs family." And that's when I laughed. A bitter, cold laugh that startled even me. "Family?" I echoed. "You mean the same family that abandoned me?" The same family that told me I should ask myself why Ethan chose her over me? Anna, that was different, my mother protested. I clenched my jaw. Number, it wasn't. You just didn't care when I was the one suffering. She let out a shaky breath. I know we've made mistakes, but this is your sister. You can't just stand by and watch her go through this. I took a deep breath. And then, in the calmest voice possible, I said, she didn't care when it was me. So why should I care now? Before she could respond, I hung up. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I felt free. Sophia's perfect life fell apart faster than I could have imagined. First, Ethan moved out of their house, filing for divorce almost immediately. He didn't even try to hide his new relationship. He flaunted his new girlfriend like Sophia had never existed. Then, the financial problems started. Sophia had quit her job after marrying Ethan, believing she didn't need to work anymore. But Ethan, he made sure that when he left, he took everything with him. Suddenly, she was broke, humiliated, and alone. The golden child, the one who always had everything handed to her, was finally facing reality. And I was doing better than ever. I had my own successful interior design business. I had surrounded myself with people who actually cared about me, and I was no longer living in Sophia's shadow. A few months after the divorce, I ran into Sophia by accident. I was at a bookstore when I turned a corner, and there she was, standing in the aisle, flipping through a self-help book. She looked different. She wasn't the confident, smug woman I had known. She looked tired, her face thinner, her eyes dull. She looked like someone who had lost everything. And for the first time in my life, she wasn't the one looking down on me. She met my gaze, and for a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She just gave me a small, broken smile, one that was almost an apology, and walked away. And that's when I realized I didn't need revenge. Life had already taken care of it for me. I thought that after Sophia's downfall, I would feel a sense of closure, that after watching her lose everything, the man she stole, the lifestyle she gloated about, the security she took for granted, I would finally feel at peace. And in some ways, I did. But then, my parents started calling again. At first, I ignored them. But after the 10th missed call in a single day, I knew they weren't going to stop. So, reluctantly, I picked up. It was my father. Anna, he said, his voice sounding older than I remembered. We need to talk, I sighed. About what? About your sister. Of course. I clenched my jaw, already prepared for another guilt trip. She's not doing well, my father continued. She moved back home. She's struggling. Your mother is heartbroken seeing her like this. I closed my eyes. And? My father hesitated. And we think it's time for you to forgive her. I let out a slow breath, gripping my phone tighter. You think I should forgive her? I repeated, my voice deadly calm. My father sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Anna, she's lost everything. Don't you think she's suffered enough? I bit my tongue, fighting back a bitter laugh. Suffered enough? I echoed. You mean like I suffered when you both stood by and watched her take everything from me? She made mistakes, he admitted, but she's still your sister. Family forgives, Anna. And that's when something inside me snapped. I had spent my entire life being dismissed by this family. I had spent years being compared to Sophia, being told I wasn't enough, being forced to accept every single injustice that came my way. And now, they wanted me to be the bigger person. Let me ask you something, I said, my voice cold. If the roles were reversed, if I had stolen Sophia's fiancé, humiliated her, and ruined her life, would you have forgiven me so easily? Silence. It stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, and that silence was my answer. I thought so, I said. Then I ended the call. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but when I opened it, I felt my stomach twist. It was an invitation to a family dinner. A handwritten note from my mother was tucked inside. Anna, we just want our family to be whole again. Please come. Let's put the past behind us. I stared at the words, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and disbelief. They wanted to pretend nothing had happened, that Sophia hadn't betrayed me, that they hadn't chosen her over me, that I hadn't spent years being treated like I was second best. They wanted me to sit at the same table as the sister who had torn my life apart and just smile. For the first time in my life, I had a choice. I could go and fall right back into the cycle of forgiveness, dismissal, and favoritism. Or I could walk away for good. I wasn't planning to go, but something inside me told me I needed closure. Not for them, but for myself. So, on the night of the dinner, I got into my car and drove to my parents' house. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like an outsider in my own family. Sophia was already seated at the table, her face pale, her once proud posture now slumped. My parents were fussing over her, making sure she had everything she needed. It was as if nothing had changed. My mother beamed when she saw me. Anna! Oh, I'm so happy you came. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out the invitation from my bag and placed it on the table. I came here to say something, I said, my voice steady. Everyone fell silent. I turned to my parents first. I spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, trying to be good enough. And no matter what I did, it was never enough. You always chose Sophia. You always excused her actions, no matter how terrible they were. My mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished, I said sharply. I used to think that if I just tried harder, if I just forgave her over and over again, maybe one day you would finally see me. But now I realize, I don't need that. I don't need your approval. I don't need this family. My mother gasped. Anna, don't say that. I mean it, I said firmly. I came here tonight to tell you that I'm done. I'm done playing the role of the unwanted daughter. I'm done forgiving people who don't deserve my forgiveness. And I'm done pretending that what Sophia did to me was just a mistake, when we all know she did it because she could. Sophia finally spoke, her voice weak. Anna, I really am sorry. I met her gaze. I don't care, I said simply. She flinched. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Fear that I truly wasn't coming back. That for once, she had lost something she couldn't take back. I turned to my parents one last time. I hope you're happy with the daughter you chose, I said, because she's the only one you'll have left. Then I walked out the door, and this time I didn't look back. Leaving that house for the last time was like shedding a weight I had carried my entire life. For the first time ever, I felt light. I had no family left, and that was okay, because the truth was, I had built a better one for myself. I had friends who loved me, a career that made me proud, and a life that no longer revolved around trying to earn love from people who never truly gave it. Sophia had spent her life taking everything from me, but the one thing she could never take? My happiness. And that was the greatest revenge of all. The moment I walked out of my parents' house that night, I knew I was never going back. There was no more hesitation, no lingering doubts, no tiny voice in my head telling me that maybe, just maybe, things could still be fixed. I had closed that chapter of my life for good. And now, for the first time ever, I was free to write a new one. It was strange at first, waking up in the morning without that nagging feeling of needing to prove myself to anyone. No more worrying about whether my parents would approve of my life choices. No more waiting for Sophia to strike again and take away whatever happiness I had found. No more feeling like I was stuck in a never-ending competition I never agreed to be part of. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. And it felt incredible. I poured myself into my work, taking on new projects that pushed me creatively. I started traveling, visiting cities I had always wanted to see, but never had the time or emotional energy to enjoy. Most importantly, I surrounded myself with people who actually valued me. Friends who celebrated my achievements instead of making me feel like they weren't good enough. Colleagues who respected my work and didn't compare me to someone else. People who chose me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that was a kind of love my family had never given me. Months passed, and I barely thought about Sophia or my parents anymore. Until one evening, as I was scrolling through my emails, I saw a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Sophia. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. A part of me wanted to delete the email without reading it. After everything she had done, what could she possibly have to say that I would care about? But curiosity got the better of me. So I clicked on it. The message was long, too long, but the first few lines told me everything I needed to know. Anna, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have done things that can't be undone. But I need to say this anyway. I am sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. For everything. I scrolled through the rest of the email, taking in her words. She wrote about how her life had fallen apart after Ethan left her. How she had lost more than just a husband. She had lost the image of herself she had spent years building. She admitted that, for the first time, she understood what it felt like to be in my position. I spent years thinking I was better than you, she wrote, thinking that I deserved more, that I could take whatever I wanted and never face the consequences. But I was wrong. And I know now that I was never better than you, Anna. You were always stronger than me. And I see that now. I exhaled slowly, closing my laptop. Did I believe her? Maybe. Did I forgive her? Because forgiveness wasn't something you could just ask for in an email. It was something that had to be earned. And after everything that had happened, I had no interest in giving her the chance to earn it. A few weeks later, I ran into my parents by accident. I was at a cafe, waiting for a coffee, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. I turned, and there they were. They looked older, more tired than I remembered. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something. Not regret, not guilt, but a quiet sadness for what could have been. Then my mother spoke. Anna, she said softly, as if saying my name might scare me away. I met her gaze but said nothing. My father cleared his throat. You look well. I nodded. I am. There was a pause, as if they didn't know what to say next. Then my mother whispered, Do you think we could ever be a family again? I considered her words carefully. Did I still love them? Yes. Would I ever let them back into my life the way they were before? So I gave them the only answer I could. I wish you the best, I said, but I've already built a family for myself. And with that, I picked up my coffee and walked away. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not because I had gotten revenge, not because Sophia had suffered, but because I had finally, truly let them go. Years later, people still ask me if I ever reconciled with my family, if I ever forgave Sophia, if I regret walking away. And my answer is always the same. Because choosing myself wasn't something I regret. It was the best decision I ever made. Some families aren't built on blood. Some families are the ones you choose. And in the end, I finally chose me.